but because of what he says. He expects us to believe him not because of what he's done, but because of what he says. In other words, God's word is the same as his action. Your word is not the same as your action. I want to see what you're doing. You say you're doing something, that's great. Now show it to me. And yet what we saw in chapter 17 is God doing that. Now, chapter 18, again, let me remind everyone, even as we jump into verse 1, that there is most likely gaps, bigger gaps than what the reading of the text point to us, between chapters, between stories, between incidences. And there's no real way to get a handle on it except occasionally when we get the ages of people. And even then, it just means that we know a certain number of years has passed. And so from chapter 17, where the circumcision has occurred, Abraham was 99 years old. He's circumcised. My goodness, I just hate to even think about that. But anyway, and his son Ishmael, who was 13, he was circumcised, and everyone in the household, whether free or bought, whether foreigner, are of the family. And so verse 18 then turns us to another story, and we're told something that may not be in Abraham's knowledge. Remember, Abraham's name has been changed from Abram to Abraham. We're told narratively that the Lord, in verse 1, appeared to Abraham by the oaks. Remember, that's that word terebinths of Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent during the hottest time of the day. And so this is a narrative statement. This does not mean that Abraham knows everything in this verse, but we do. So from verse 1 of chapter 18, we know that the Lord is appearing to Abraham. But I want you to pay attention narratively that when we're beginning to be told what Abraham is seeing, it's a little different. And so there's some point where Abraham comes to realize, as you'll see, that this is the Lord appearing to him. But this means there probably was a period of time, as we're going to see in the next few verses, in which Abraham does not know it is the Lord. Because verse 2 tells us that Abraham looked up, literally lifted up his eyes, and saw and looked three men standing across from him. And the way that that's phrased, it indicates that they were near enough for him to see them, but as you're going to see a little bit later, they're far enough away that he's able to run to them. Now notice, this is being told from Abraham's vantage point. And what does he see? He sees three men. He does not see God. He does not seem to know that there's a God. He simply sees three men. When he saw them standing there, he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them, and then either instinctually or by happenstance, he bows low to the ground. And the words there that are used, it's interesting because we're not sure whether it's what Abraham actually did or whether the narrator decides to, the author, the writer decides to use that particular word to kind of connote what we know, but Abraham doesn't necessarily know, because the word there, bowed low, is actually the word that means to worship. So it is the language that would have been used in order to show worship. And so we're not sure if Abraham actually knows that he should be worshiping these creatures. It could be the narrator is having a little fun. He's told us the Lord has come to see Abraham. Abraham sees three men, and then he tells us that when he goes and bows, he uses the word that tells us, if we all spoke Hebrew, it tells us that he's worshiping them. Either way, he is giving the proper response to his visitors, whether he knows it or not. And this kind of wordplay continues on. Verse 3, so he says, my Lord. Now here's the interesting thing. What is present there are the consonants that would be present for the word Adonai. Anybody remember the word Adonai? Adonai is the word that means Lord. It also means master. And it is the word that came to be most of the time the choice of the Jews when they would run into the name of God, the Tetragrammaton, instead of saying Yahweh, which they did not want to break the later commandment of the Lord that says, do not take my name in vain, they would substitute a word in its place. And later scribes would actually fill in the vowels such to cause you to stumble. So you would come upon the word and it would be vocalized funny, meant to cause you to stumble, meant for you to recognize this is Yahweh, meant for you not to say it. And what would you say? You would say Adonai. Now what's interesting in this particular piece here is that Adonai, again, refers to master. And the way that it's marked in the way that it would have been marked with the vowels for the substitute for Yahweh. However, what's interesting is that it is possible that this is actually later scribal activity, that the scribes filled that in, and that in fact Abraham meant to use another vocalization, which instead of Adonai, Adoni, which means instead of Lord, as in God, it simply means sir or master. Okay? And so my point to you is that there is a little play in the narrative here about how much does Abraham know of who has shown up. How much does he know at this point within the story? And the scribes, either due to the way they mark it later, because remember when these are first written down, they're written down all in consonantal Hebrew. There are no vowels. And I have, back in the day, don't ask me to do it now, but I have had to translate consonantal Hebrew. And as much as those little squigglies are hard to read, they're sure a lot of help compared to just consonants, where you're having to guess just the consonants, you have no vowels, and you're having to figure out from the context, how should this be vocalized? Which word is it? And did you do Hebrew in Hebrew school? You had all the little squiggles, didn't you? That's exactly right. Dead Sea Scrolls and earlier, they were consonantal, they were not pointed, as it's called, and it was a real challenge. So what's happening here is there's probably, narratively, there's some play going on here. There's some play on the part of the writer, on the part of the storyteller, that would not show up orally. Because when you're speaking the story, you would have to vocalize it. And so you wouldn't be able to do the same play that you're able to do writing when you're writing it down. So bottom line is that Abraham says to these three, my Lord. So notice he zeroed in on one. Does he know? We don't know. But he zeroed in on one because he says, my Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by and leave your servant. So don't pass by and don't abandon us. Instead, verse 4, let a little water be brought so that you may all wash your feet and rest under the tree. So this is typical good hospitality in probably a Bedouin type setting. And you see strangers that are coming by, they're traveling through, and you offer to them some hospitality. In addition to the water, verse 5, he says, and let me get a bit of food. All right, and that's kind of a funny statement considering what he does later. Pay attention to what's later. The literal Hebrew says a piece of bread. Well, Abraham is going to give him more than a piece of bread. You'll see that in just a moment. Let me get a bit of food or a piece of bread so that you may refresh yourselves, so that you may strengthen your heart, literally the Hebrew says, strengthen yourselves, since you have passed by your servant's home. So Abraham is in this humility posture towards the guests, towards the strangers. Again, perhaps just simple hospitality, perhaps a sense that this is something more, that these people, these men are something more than just three men walking. And we simply don't know. We've seen this before. How much did Abraham understand about Melchizedek? Why did he give to Melchizedek a tenth of all of the loot that he had recovered? It's left undefined for us. It's left questionable. Did he sense who Melchizedek was and who we seem to believe he was? Obviously from the writer of Hebrews, that he was one who had no father, had no mother, had no beginning, had no end, and was in fact the process by which Jesus Christ was after the order of that priesthood. I think he was a theophany. By the way, let me tell you a funny story. Last night, we're moving to a new phone system. You'll hear more about that over the next couple weeks. If you call, you'll run into it, but I'll explain everything over the next month or so. But I'm working out some of the bugs, so I called the tech support line to work on this phone system. And I got a gentleman And somehow, I don't remember, Dad, you were sitting there. Do you remember what alerted him? I forget what it was. Something alerted him that it came out that I was a pastor. It came out that I had gone to seminary. It came out that I had been a faculty member in administration at a seminary. And so he was like, oh, I got to ask you questions. I'm planning to go to, and he named a seminary. And I said, well, if they'll let you do that, I thought, I wonder how, the people listening in are going to think about this. You're supposed to be helping me with the telephone. So we went ahead and took care of telephone. And then he says, all right, I got a question for you. I'm like, okay. He's like, what do you think about Melchizedek? Yeah. So I gave him my 3-minute version of what I think about Melchizedek, and he was good with that. And then he says, all right, I got another question for you. I said, okay. He says, what do you think about the Nephilim? And I went, oh, good Lord, here we go. So I gave him my answer about the Nephilim. So anyway, we had a good chat, and he says, are you online? I says, yes, we are. I said, go to newarkupc.org. So anyway, I don't know what his name is. I can't even remember when I called him, but from somewhere associated with the company Grasshopper, he may be watching us on the web. So anyway, I got a chance to do a little witnessing this week. Anyway, side note there. So Melchizedek came up. So it's possible that Abraham is again sensing something of who these people are. He's zeroed in on one, and now he's placed himself, the language he's using, he's at least calling them, master. And notice he's referring to himself, you've passed by your servant's home. And then he says, after that you may be on your way. All right, they replied, you may do as you say. Now, let's look at how the writer tells us about this bit of food. This is rather amusing to me. A bit of food. It's like some of you, whenever you fix me a plate at the potluck. Oh, I'm just going to bring you a little bit of food, Pastor. And when I get done, there's a reason I'm so fat. Because it's more than a bit of food. So Abraham, verse 6, hurried into the tent, said to Sarah, quick, 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 quick. Oh, I just messed myself up. Hold on. There we go. Quick, take 3 measures. Anybody want to know what 3 measures is? The Hebrew means 3 seahs, which is the equivalent to about 20 quarts or 22 liters of flour, which would make, I think, the last time I checked, a whole lot of bread. Some of you that bake, would it make a lot of bread? Yeah, it 22 liters, 20 quarts of flour. So it's rather ironic. I'm going to give you a bit of food, literally the Hebrew is bit of bread, and then what does he tell Sarah to do? Make a boatload of bread. Now fine flour, knead it and make bread. And this bread was probably the simple bread that could be made actually rather quickly at the campfire by Bedouins. And so he says, take that. And then verse 7, Abraham runs to the herd. Remember, he's getting them a bit of food, right? Then he runs to the herd, chooses a fine tender calf, gave it to a servant who quickly prepared it. It is rather ironic. This is like my house. When I'm going to feed you food, I run around and tell everybody else what to do. Abraham's not cooking a bit of this. He's running around, and that's what I do. I don't know how to cook very well. I've lost it. So I tell Reg what I need. I tell the kids what I need. They all know how to cook. I don't know how to cook. Maybe Abraham was like me. Anyway, so he gives it to the servant who quickly prepared it. Abraham then took some curds and milk along with the calf that they had prepared, and I would assume with the boatload of bread that they prepared, and placed the food before them. Okay? So place the food before them. And they ate while he was standing near them under a tree. Now that's an interesting thing too, that he didn't eat with them. Okay? He did not eat with them. That runs a little counter to the process. Typically you eat together. And so I don't know if this again points to maybe he has a sense that there is something unique about these people that are in his presence. But again, narratively nothing is explicit. Verse 9 says, then they asked him, where is Sarah your wife? He replied, there in the tent. And then one of them said, and here the wording gets unique, I will surely return to you when the season comes round again. And that the phrasing of that literally means when time lives or revives. And so what this really is referring to, it's a rather circular way of referring to spring. When spring arrives, when life comes back into motion, I will return to you, and your wife Sarah will have a son. Now that's an interesting statement too, and it may be where they begin to get a sense that this truly is a unique person, because why would a person return and in them returning, she gets pregnant? Okay? Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, not far behind him. Verse 11 tells us that Abraham and Sarah were old and advancing in years. You know, it's one thing to be old, and it's another thing to be advancing on old. I think they were in the downhill slide. In other words, they hadn't just kind of crested the top. They'd picked up some speed. They were advancing. And Sarah had long since passed menopause. Literally, it had ceased to be for Sarah after a way like women. Okay, so she had passed the birthing years. She had since ceased to be able to have children. So, verse 12, Sarah laughs to herself. You remember we saw this before, that Abram at the time, also laughed, and we got the tie-in with Yitzhak being named after that laughter. So Sarah laughed to herself, and she said or thought to herself, "After I am worn out, will I have pleasure? Especially when my husband is too old." Now what's interesting, there is some scholarly discussion whether that word is supposed to be translated as pleasure or should it be translated as conception. But the way it reads here, it certainly seems like there's a rather blunt statement being made. We are so old that my husband isn't even paying any attention to me. I'm worn out, and I'm not even having sex. It's not just about menopause. I'm not even having intercourse. You got to be kidding me. I ain't having no baby. It's just done. What are you talking about? I'm worn out. I don't even have the pleasure of my husband's company. He's just too old. This is funny to me. Now maybe it freaks you out, but I think it's kind of funny. And so this is the laughter. This is the thought process that's going on in Sarah's mind. Sarah's like, I've done given up. Now remember, she's heard from her husband, I would presume, the promises of God that have been given. She's had the same disappointments and even tried to help out the disappointments and made a mess. Take Hagar. They have Ishmael. Then, of course, Hagar shows disrespect to her, and Ishmael grows up, and God refuses. And so somehow time has moved on, and they've just kind of shut down. Now, verse 13. Interesting statement here. Now we get narratively again the statement. The Lord said to Abraham. Why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child? Or indeed, truly, will I have a child when I'm old? Am I going to really have a baby when I'm old? And then we get an interesting, and this really for me evokes the language of Gabriel and Mary in the Gospel of Luke in particular. Is anything impossible? Remember, the Lord's the one speaking to Abraham. Is anything impossible for the Lord? The literal phrasing there is not the word impossible, but is anything too wonderful or too extraordinary or too surpassing or too amazing for God? So you can see how there's this motif that later will get picked up with the virgin birth, of where God, the Lord, the Creator, the one who gives life, has the ability to give life even in non-life-giving circumstances. Whether that be an old couple who presumably are no longer even being intimate, or a young lady who has yet to be married but is going to give birth to the Savior of the world. Same kind of language, same kind of question. Is anything impossible for the Lord? And here again, we get that same statement. I will return to you when the season comes round again, and Sarah will have a son. This promise that I have made. I've told you I'm not accepting Ishmael. I've told you that your plans are not what's going to cut it. And now, it's here. The next season, when spring arrives, you're having a baby. And it's interesting because I wonder what they felt at that moment. It's kind of like when we have hopes, we have dreams, we have promises, and then they lie dormant for year after year after year, perhaps decade after decade. Nothing seems to happen. Yeah, God said it, but nothing happened. Nothing has come to fruition. And then he comes in so definitively, comes in so forcefully, says it's not some undetermined future point. Now it has been narrowed to a season. When spring comes, I will return to you. Incidentally, by the way, there's no record that God ever returned. In other words, it wasn't a literal physical return, but rather it was the miraculous. It was the Almighty coming back to her and causing her and Abraham to have the ability to have a child when they should not have been able to have a child. Now this is funny. Verse 15 strikes me as amusing. Then Sarah lied. Boy, they got a problem with lying, don't they? Then Sarah lied, saying, I did not laugh. And she did this because she was afraid. When you have done something, don't deny it to God. You can get away with denying it to other human beings. You can probably get away with trying to deny it to yourself. But you are really, really stupid. All of us are really, really numbskulls to deny it to God. And look at what the Lord says. The Lord says, no, you did laugh. What are you going to say to God when he says, nah, don't you be lying to me. I know exactly what you did. My eyes rove to and fro across the earth. I heard you. Don't lie to God. Be honest with him. No, you did laugh. You did laugh. So, chapter 18, verses 1 through 15, is this scenario where God, again, where in the overall timeline, we're not sure, God appears, and that which has been a promise, that which has been a hope, that has been really not fulfilled. That which has been central to the covenant. And that Abram has actually taken the scars or the sign of that covenant upon his own person and upon the person of every male in his household but with no fulfillment of the promise. This moment now, the promise is being given some specificity. It's gone from this generic, you're going to have a child. You're going to be the father of many nations. You're going to be the one who blesses the world with ancestors who cannot, or with descendants who cannot be counted, just like the sands of the sea and just like the stars of the heaven can't be counted, so your descendants won't be able to be counted. It's all generic, it's out in the front, and God hasn't fulfilled a bit of it. And boom, in this scenario, in this episode, God gets real specific. When spring rolls around. When spring rolls around. It's not unspecified out into the future. Now it's gotten very specific. You know what's funny about God? And let me take just a little side route here for a second. You know what's funny about God? Sometimes he makes promises that we think we would die for. And then he takes so long to fulfill them that when it comes time for him to fulfill them, we almost have gotten over them and are like, I don't really want it. I got at least one or two smiles or amens or waves at me. I've experienced this. Man, it's something that you thought you would die for. I mean, it's just, oh man, I'd give my right leg for that. I mean, oh yes, God, I want nothing more than that. And then he takes his good old time. And then he comes rolling back around and you're like, you got to be kidding me. Now you're showing up? Now you're saying it's time? I'll pass. I'm not interested anymore. I've done moved on. I've had several of those. I remember I had that definitely with regard to schooling. Oh my goodness. Got done with the master's work, came home, started working in the church. There was nothing to do. They shut down the Bible school where I thought I was going to go teach. There was nothing else going on. I thought, I don't know why I went to Harvard, but anyway, let's move on. Then they got to go start a graduate school. I argued with God for 3 months. I'm like, God, you got stinking timing. Not interested. I don't want to work that hard. I don't want to go back to school. I've gotten used to not being in school. I got a wife. I got a baby. I got another baby in the womb. I'm not interested. We've already started things in the church. I don't want to do that. It'll mess up my parents' life. It'll mess up the church's life. God, your timing stinks. Can I just remind you again that God doesn't really care about your opinion when it comes to His timing? I'm not trying to be rude. I really am not. But we have to get a hold of the reality that God is not impressed by our irritation. I need to say that one more time. I don't know why, but I just feel I do. God is not impressed by our irritation. You're irritated about my timing? Oh well, get over it. You don't like how I moved in that? Well, that's tough. I'm God. I'm not asking your permission. You want to be on board or not? Do you want the blessing or not? Do you want the kid or not? I told you I was going to give you a kid. I told you over and over. I showed you the stars of the heaven. I showed you the sands of the sea. I even had you circumcise every male in your camp to show that you believed it. And now I'm showing up to do it and you're like, but that's how we are, isn't it? He gives promises. We walk along with those promises. Enough time goes by and we kind of let go of those promises. I mean, we know them, they're in our head, they're there, but we've kind of moved on. We've made peace with it, they're not coming to pass. And then God shows up and we're like mad at Him. Now maybe you don't get mad at God, but I do. I tell God off all the time. Maybe that's why God has to have mercy on me or something, I don't know. But I do, I tell God off all the time. I figure that He's probably big enough to handle it. I mean, little old me doesn't really intimidate Him. My kids are all getting bigger now. My oldest one, I don't mess with him too much. I don't tell him that. Occasionally I mess with him just enough to let him think that I've still got something in me. But he's over 6 foot and he's big, and I don't want him to hurt me. So I do mind games to make sure that I'm still on top with regard to it. But other than that, I don't try to really tussle with him. He's going to hurt my back or something. And the next kid down, he's kind of buff. He's skinny and wiry, but he's tough. Caleb's got it there. And Marcus, man, the other night I looked and Marcus has got a mustache. I'm like, dear God, and I'm not kidding you. It's a nice looking mustache. It's no spots in there, man. It's just coming in. I was like impressed. I held him up. I'm like, you got a mustache. All right, so I'm losing my example here, but let me press on. Little Cassandra, she's still little. She doesn't like to be little, but she is. She's still a string bean. When she gets mad and wants to beat on me, I'm not really worried. The other day she was mad at me about something. She said, I hate you. Now, if that in your world is just horrible, okay, I understand that. But in mine, I give my kids latitude. I do. Because I'm the parent. They're the child. Well, they're not showing respect to you. Actually, they do. There's some key points where they don't cross over that line. Until they cross over that line, I give them latitude. I want them talking to me. I don't want them being quiet. I want them talking to me. So if she's mad at me, I want to know it. You're going to get in trouble with God, not for being silent. Not for talking to Him. You're going to get in trouble with God for being silent. God wants you talking to Him. So if you're mad at Him, tell Him. Because I really don't think the guy for whom the heavens is His seat and the earth is His footstool is really too worried about me. I don't know. Just my perspective. I don't think I'm really a threat to God. I don't think you're a threat to God. He's your father. He loves you. He's your mother. He gave birth to you. He's your creator. He's secure. God is secure. And so I just imagine Abraham and Sarah in this same kind of spot, just aggravated with God. Your timing stinks, God. Your timing stinks. Now, we're going to have to leave that tonight, okay? There's the promise. God's coming in the spring. She's going to have a baby. It's miraculous because, hey, her and Abraham are so old, they're sleeping in separate tents. Had to wait for a minute. Y'all are slow tonight. What'd you do? Have a long day today? Come on. That was a funny joke. All right, anyway. So, time has moved on. But God says in spring, a very definite point, in spring, I'm coming back. You're going to have a child. Now, the story kind of turns. These three gentlemen, at this point, at least narratively, were unequivocal, this is the Lord. And there's a real good chance that at this point, somehow in this process, Abraham has figured out that there is a theophany. Now, theophany comes from the Greek words, two words. Theos, which means God, and phaneo, which means to see. Okay? And so a theophany has come within theological terms and biblical studies terms to be known as my definition of it is any non-permanent physical or visible manifestation of God. Okay? And so there's all kinds of theophanies. They don't just have to be humans. It can be another example of something is the burning bush, for example. God appears, it's visible. It's a manifestation of God. God is not a burning bush. When you get to heaven, you will not see a burning bush. He didn't stay a burning bush. But he manifested himself in that moment to Moses there in the Sinai Peninsula as the burning bush. And so somewhere in here, Abraham figures out that there's a theophany, what we call a theophany. There's a manifestation of God. Is it already because of the way God is speaking to him and the way God is speaking to Sarah, or is that just the narrator? We don't know. But what happens is in verse 16 that the men get up to leave. So they're getting up to depart from there. And they look out over Sodom, or they turn toward the face of Sodom. Now, the narrator tells us that Abraham was walking with them to see them on their way. Typical courteous thing to walk with them out. I ran into this. I've had it several times, but one I remember, there was an Ethiopian couple that came here for a while. Many of you can remember Matiku and Sigi. And every time I would go to their home to teach a Bible study, they would have food for me. That was one thing, which was really cool. Anytime I come to your home, food is always appropriate. I'm trying to help y'all stay awake because some of you look like you're about to fall asleep. So I'm giving you a moment here, okay? Anytime I come to your home, food is always appropriate. Anyway, there was always food. But then one of the things that Matiku would always do is he would walk me out. And when I say walk me out, they lived in an apartment building. Not only would he walk me out of the apartment, but he would walk me down the stairs and outside. He would walk me to the outside. And from there, he would bid me farewell. Which is very different, because if you come to my house, I don't typically walk you all the way to your car. I'll say, there's the door, see you later. It's just I don't have that same culture. I don't have that same background. And so we see this, I probably should ask Arash about, is this within Iranian culture, is walking someone outside, out of the house? Yeah, okay. So it's a sign of hospitality. It's a sign of respect. And so obviously they're not walking out of the house. They're in a tent. They're probably sitting under the trees. But he basically walks them out of the camp. He walks them out of the place. And so as he's walking them out, he sees that they're looking toward the direction of Sodom, okay? And in the midst of this, we narratively are then told something that I don't know that Abraham ever heard. Because the Lord says, and the way he says it, you'll tell that it's kind of like in his mind, okay? It's spoken to us. It's recorded to us. Should I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Should I go on my way? I've delivered the message that in spring I'm coming and I'm going to cause Sarah to have a child. But I'm here for another reason. Should I hide this from him? Should I refrain from telling him this? Verse 18 says, after all, Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations on the earth will pronounce blessings on one another using his name. And see, this is a reiteration of Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. Abram, leave your country, leave your kindred, go to a land I will show you, and I will bless you, and I will bless the world through you. This same language here is connoting not only are you going to bless them, but perhaps you are the example of what a blessing is. So people will look at the blessing that you receive from me, and therefore you will be that example of blessing. Verse 19, I have chosen him so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep, they will keep, the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. Then the Lord speaks of himself, then the Lord will give to Abraham what he promised him. So we've got a reference back to this promise, not only of Genesis chapter 12, but also back to the promise specifically of having a child. So God's kind of having a conversation saying, should I hide from Abraham, this guy that I am going to bless so mightily, this one who's going to be the father of many nations, this one who's going to be an example of what it means to be blessed by me, this one who I am going to bring my promise to pass just in spring, should I hide from him what I'm about to do? And verse 20 then tells us what he decided. So the Lord, in response to his questions in his own mind, so the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin is so blatant or so heavy. Verse 21, that I must go down and see if they are as wicked as the outcry suggests. If the accusations against them hold up. If not, I want to know. Now what's interesting is this verse 21 carries with it language that we've already seen God do back at the Tower of Babel. Everybody remember the Tower of Babel? They get done with the ark and they go and they build this tower, whatever it is, this city. And God says, let us go down, same language, let us go down and see what they are doing. Let us investigate. And so what we have here is we have hands-on kind of language. We have language that's very different. And this is important. It's a good time to talk about this. In our Genesis, the story of beginnings, we have language about this God, that God is not off in the heavens, distant and disengaged. God is a God who gets his hands dirty, makes man of the mud of the earth. He's a God who goes down and investigates. Even if he doesn't literally, physically have to come down to the earth because he's everywhere, he's a God who's engaging. He's a God who is involved, has come down. He's investigating what's happening. He wants to see what's happening at the Tower of Babel. He wants to know what's happening at Sodom and Gomorrah. And so he and ostensibly two angels have come to investigate, to see whether the outcry. Now, obviously, this is anthropomorphic language. This is language that's put in human terms. If I am in one location and I hear that something's happening, I'm over here and I hear that there's a fight going on in the fellowship hall, I have to go to the fellowship hall to find out about the fight. I don't have knowledge from over here. And so this language is anthropomorphic. It's connoting the same kind of thing that you and I would have to do if we were in one location, heaven, and we wanted to know something about what was happening on the earth. Obviously, God in literal terms already knows what's going on. But he's a God that's engaged. He's a God that's involved. And that's how the story is being told. That he's a God who's engaged and involved intimately, personally. Now, I'll just throw this in as an aside, but later, church fathers had trouble with this because they came from a very different sensibility than the scriptures. They came from a Greco-Roman world where divinity was to stay transcendent, was to stay separated from humanity. And this is part of why they came up with the doctrine of the Trinity. Because they had to come up with a way to talk about how could God be kept transcendent and pure while at the same time descending to the earth. The Hebrew mindset has none of that. God comes down and eats a bit of food. He comes down and makes humans of the dust of the earth. He breathes into those humans. He does CPR on mud balls. Okay? This is a God that's engaged with the physical world. He has no problem with the physical world. There's stuff going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. he wants to know about it. He says, I don't know if it's true or not, but I'm coming to find out. I want to know what's going on here. Now, verse 22 tells us the two men turned and headed towards Sodom. But Abraham was still standing before the Lord. And this is almost language of entreaty, that Abraham is almost like blocking the Lord. So God has thought, should I hide from Abraham? Decides not, tells him, I've heard all kinds of horrible things. Accusations against Sodom and Gomorrah. And I got to go down and find out. And that's where I'm headed. I'm headed to find out if it's true. Now the funny thing is Abraham, he already knows it's true. And you notice that Abraham's response is with that knowledge. Because Abraham doesn't go, well, let me know what you find out. Or let me know how it's going. Abraham's mind is racing. Because he knows it's wicked. And who's in Sodom and Gomorrah? Lot. So we get this desperate and yet rather ironic episode in which the man who believes God and yet doubts him, okay, believes God and yet doubts him, contests God's decisions. Verse 23, so Abraham approaches and says, will you sweep away the godly along with the wicked? What if there are 50 godly people in the city? Will you really wipe it out and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 godly people who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the godly with the wicked, treating the godly and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge, the ruler of the whole earth, do what is right? Wow, that's a gutsy statement. Now we read through that real quick, but that's a gutsy statement. Abraham just gets squarely in front of the one who said, I'm coming back in spring and Sarah's going to have a baby. Maybe he's already sensed, like he did with Melchizedek, that this was a divine manifestation, because he does do some things, obeisance, bowing, the feast, etc., etc. So maybe he already knows it. But at this point, God has revealed himself. I have heard. I'm coming down to find out. I'm investigating what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. So he places himself squarely in front of God, and he says, whoa, you can't do what you're planning on doing. Abraham is one gutsy guy. Despite the fact that he hasn't been believing God, despite the fact that he's been doubting God, despite the fact that he's been laughing when God tells him that he's going to have a child, despite the fact that he's made a mess of it, both in Egypt and with Hagar, Abraham is a man of action. Abraham has no problem getting in God's face. Far be it from you. The judge, the ruler of the earth, would never do that. And I know you, God, you're better than that. There's no way you're going to do this. I think of another one who does this as well, Moses. God gets sick of the people of Israel, says, they're stiff-necked, I'm tired of them, I'm going to kill them all. And Moses gets in his face and says, now God, you can't do that. If you go doing that, then you're going to take, Egypt is going to be able to take your name and think, God, you're smarter than that. You would never do that. This is funny. This is ironic. The story of our beginnings shows us human beings interacting with God in an aggressive, interactive relationship manner. In other words, this sounds more like me and Keith than it does, oh God, Father of heaven and earth, we thank thee, we praise thee, for thou art righteous. No. Abraham's up in his grill. He's like, whoa, God, you can't be doing that. 50 people. Wouldn't you spare the city for 50 people? I know, you're the judge of the earth. You're fair, you're just. What are you doing? Once again, I think of a father with a child. When my kids argue with me, I think it's funny. I don't get incensed because they're trying to work out their brains. Now, most of the time, they're not as smart as me. but I'll go with it. I'll listen to him for a while. And that's the sense I get here. God goes, okay. So verse 26, so the Lord replied, if I find in the city of Sodom 50 godly people, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Okay, if I find 50 godly people. Abram asks, well, since I've undertaken to speak to you, Lord, although I am but dust and ashes, what if there are 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city because 5 are missing? Now what's funny about this is he's already argued to God that he needs, if you got 50 people, then you won't destroy the city. Now he's got his toe in. So now he's going, all right, so I can't find 50. If we just got 5 less, if I fall 5 short, are you still going to kill the city? Really? You're going to do that, God? I mean, for the lack of 5. Wait a minute, Abraham, I thought you said 50. 50 was already a steal for a city, and now you're working me over about the 5. For just the lack of 5, are you going to destroy the city? So God replies, I will not destroy if I find 45 there. Abraham spoke to him again. Come on, God, what if 40 are found? What if 40 are found? I mean, just 40. What if 40 are found? Come on, lack of 10. So God says, I will not do it for the sake of 40. Then Abraham said, may the Lord not be angry so that I may speak. What if 30 are found? What if we're lacking 20? All right, Abraham, I will not do it if I find 30 there. Abraham said, since I've undertaken to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 are found? This is funny. This is amusing. What if only 20 are found? All right, fine, Abraham. I will not destroy it for the sake of 20. Finally, Abraham said, may the Lord not be angry so that I may speak just once more. What if 10 are found there? He's going from 50 to 10. He says, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. Now, I don't know. You could maybe count it up. Maybe 10 was the magic number that was in Lot's family. You know, you got Lot, his wife, 2 daughters. But then we know he had other children and their wives. I don't know if 10 was the magic number and Abraham was wheedling his way, all the time to get there. I've learned that with my kids. They start one spot, but I know they got an end point. And sometimes I just let them go because I know where the end point is. I just want to see how they're going to get there. But verse 33 says, the Lord then went on his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned home. Now chapter 19, which is where we'll pick up in a few weeks, tells us what actually happens. And what's funny is because of Abraham arguing 50, 45, 40, 30, 20, 10, what does God do? He in fact goes in and gets Abraham's Lot, his wife, his 2 daughters, and would have gotten out the rest of the family as well if they had come before destroying the city. So I'll have more to say about that at a later point with regard to that. This chapter for me strikes me as amusing and funny. Both episodes show God and Abraham and Sarah interacting in a very human manner, a relationship-based manner. You need to have a relationship with God. You need to interact with that God. If your formality or your respect or your fear or whatever else causes you to be distant from that God, you need to figure out how to overcome that, because God desires a relationship with you. And you'll be surprised what you're able to do when you engage him in a real relationship. You'll be surprised how he speaks to you. You'll be surprised what he doesn't hide from you if you'll engage him in relationship. All right, I'm out of time. In fact, I'm over time. I apologize. Tell the boss over there. You all had a lot of questions. No, I'm kidding. Let's stand and thank the Lord for his word. Can we do it? And then parents, run over and get your kids. Jesus, we love you. We worship you and we praise you, Lord. We thank you, God, for the opportunity and the privilege to be here, Lord. Help us, Lord, as we study your word, as we learn, as we grow, Lord. Thank you for provision for us. God, give us a good rest of the week, Lord. Give us safety. Be with us now, Lord, and lead us and guide us as we do your work and do your